Okay, so I'm Paolo, and I'm a software engineer at the AdWords Express team at Google. And today I wanted to share with you how we got to share around 50% of our client code among the Flutter and AngularDart apps. And yeah, it doesn't seem like much, but I'm not including all the Google infrastructure, because if I did that, I would get this crazy high number and you'd not believe me. So 50%. Google has a lot of apps, and two of them, you may not have heard of them. They are AdWords and AdWords Express. Yes, there is an AdWords Express, and yes, they are different. But they have some things in common. And two of them are, they make a lot of money. And the other thing is they are built on AngularDart. And they also have Android and iOS native apps, which means that we have 3 code bases. Awesome. Awesome because I get to do the same thing 3 times, every single time, and hate myself a lot. So because we don't really like hating ourselves, we are constantly trying to find ways to share more code among those apps. And Flutter came out. And we were like, this is awesome. This is awesome because Flutter, first, Flutter doesn't, okay, I'm not going to use that word, but Flutter is good instead of not like Android and iOS. And it is an elegant, efficient framework that will let us have a truly single code base for iOS and Android apps. And because Flutter is written, you write Flutter apps in Dart, we just happen to have this gigantic web client lying around that is written in Dart. So I thought, maybe all I need to do is import the model from the Angular app and pass that to the Flutter app and go have a beer or something because I'll be done. But of course, that's not the case at all. And that's not the case at all for a lot of reasons, but the important reasons are, first, we cannot just import a model because in reality, the business logic is all over the place. And we as software engineers, we like to think that our apps are like this. Like you have the UI, you have the model, and they have clear boundaries, and the interactions are simple and clear. But in reality, you don't really have that. Like you may even start with this, but over time, slowly but surely, you get this. And you may tell yourself, no, that doesn't happen with me, right? Well, you go to the AngularDart website and go to the Getting Started tutorial, and you have this. This is the main app component. It shows a list of heroes, and that's very simple, right? You have a list of heroes, you can select a hero, that's it. Well, there's a bunch of business logic on this thing. The first thing is it knows how the heroes are fetched. It knows how many heroes can be selected. Let's say I want to change this app to select more than 1 hero. Now I have to change the Angular application, and I have to change the Flutter application. And lastly, it knows that when you select a hero, you have to change the selected hero, which sounds redundant, but it really isn't, because in practice, you need to do more stuff usually. So even this very simple 4-line component has this problem. So yeah, you have no hope. Second thing is, remember that infrastructure thing I talked about? It was written for the Dart, or for the AngularDart app. And because it was written for web, it relies on a bunch of stuff that is not available in Flutter. For example, like the browser window to get the current location, or the JavaScript context to do some caching or event pass. So, and it doesn't seem like much. I mean, you could say, just rewrite those things and be good, right? But turns out that our infrastructure is quite big. And it has a ton of stuff that we actually want to reuse for many, many reasons. Among them, API clients, crash and performance monitoring, activity tracking, and some secret sauce. And if I want to launch this thing before 2050, I should not rewrite this stuff. So, okay, we can't just use infrastructure, that's bad. And lastly, we can't just import a model because, yes, Flutter is magic. But you know what? Angular is more magic. Because, and it all boils down to state management. In AngularDart, you don't really need to bother about what happens when state changes. It magically, not really. It magically is going to update things for you. But Flutter tells you, you know what? we need to be efficient, and if you want to be efficient, you need to call setState, basically, right? And again, the model was implemented for AngularDart app, and that means that whatever like interface it has, it is not optimized for this use case. So now I have to write adapters to wrap the Angular model, and I'm going to have this bloated Flutter app, and I'm going to hate myself again. And this time it's going to be my fault, so no. All right, so, oh no, right? Hopes dashed. But hey, look on the bright side. We get to do some refactoring. And we, as software engineers, we love refactoring because our code is always awesome, and the other people's code is not awesome, right? So by definition, when I rewrite something, it's going to be better. And, right? But we cannot rewrite everything from scratch. So, oh no, we have to live with other people's code somehow. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through a Flutter app, and I'm going to use Flutter instead of Angular because setState, right? So whatever we do is going to be, it has to be compatible with Flutter. And then let's see what I have to do to get this thing working. And I make a mistake of live coding. Okay, so I have this app called Purveyor. It is a search engine for cats. It is a heavily untapped market that we really need to do something about. So here you can search for basically what? Tuna. And then you get a list of search results, right? Like non-GMO tuna, organic grass-fed. So this is a pretty simple app. Is the font? Oh, the font is too small. Let's see. Preferences, fonts, for apply. That better? Okay. All right. So let's go straight to this screen, like the tuna, the search box, and the results. So we have this stateful widget, and I'll tell you why it is stateful soon. And it is pretty simple. You build the input, you build the preamble, which is this string results for tuna, and you build the results. And the way you build the input is you have this search carry input widget that takes a own change. And when you change the carry, you have to update the carry, and you have to do, and you search as you type, so you perform search. And you build the preamble by just interpolating the carry with a results for string. And you build the results by just mapping, creating a column with mapping the results to a widget, search result widget. So that looks really clean. That looks okay-ish, but that doesn't cut it. Because, again, that's a bunch of business logic in here. It knows, for example, by having this perform search on change, you're incorporating this knowledge that search happens as you type. And by having this preamble here, the widget knows how to build the preamble. So again, I think that the benchmark is like, if you want to change something on the app and you have to change at 2 places, there shouldn't be 2 places, right? It should be at the same place. It's probably business logic. So that's the case for the preamble. So if you needed to change the preamble for the Flutter and Angular apps with this design, you need to change both of them. So yeah, no, right? And build results seems okay. Nothing bad happening here, I guess. And perform search is really bad, again, because it knows that you have to use an API to search the results. And when the results get there, you have to set state. So, and we still have this stuff here, right? We have this binary API, which doesn't exist in AngularDart. And you have to keep track of the carry and the search results. And similarly, if you have data in 2 places, like let's say we extract this to a business logic class, right? But now this data is in 2 places. You have to maintain the current carry on the widget and maintain the current carry on the business logic. Now you have data in 2 places, and believe me, they're gonna get out of sync. And it's gonna be really awful to track that down. I've been there multiple times. Okay, so yeah, this is bad, right? This looks sort of okay, but it is bad. So one exercise I like to do when I'm trying to refactor or redesign an API is I go here and I just start throwing stuff away and rewriting stuff. And it's not going to build, of course. I hope so. It shouldn't build. And basically, I just want to see how I want the API, the code to look like. And then from there, I try to make it actually happen. So, OK, I don't like the API, these variables here. I remove them. I don't like this that I have to perform session query. So let's say I have this business logic class, and then I do on text on query change, right? And when building the preamble, again, I just have this business logic class. Right? And I get the preamble for that. And I also get the results from the business logic. And that means that I don't need to have this anymore. I don't need, the widget doesn't know how to perform the search. And see, it's much more concise. And let's say I have this class called search business logic. Right? That looks better. That looks better because now basically the widget is really dumb. It doesn't do anything besides just displaying the data. And if I want to change, for example, how the preamble is built, I can just change on the business logic, and it's going to magically work on both Angular and Flutter. But yeah, this doesn't compile, right? So it's useless. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just delete it and ignore it. And I'm going here, and yeah, I know, right? I don't use this thing. Let's do this. And did someone tell you that how to load is awesome? This is awesome. I just changed a header, and it just works. Crazy. OK, so this is gone. So let's try to make this thing work, right? Basically, this is basically the same code, more or less. And then I moved everything to this search business logic class, and like it keeps track of the query, it keeps track of the results, it builds the preamble, and it updates the query when you perform the search, so the preamble is updated. And I don't know if you folks, like how many of you have actually any Flutter experience? The last 24 hours also count. OK, that's good. All right, so like I'm just scrolling, but maybe you wouldn't see, but this will not work. And this will not work because even though I am performing the operations on the business logic, I have to update the state on the Flutter widget, or else it won't be built. So really what I need to do here is I need to change, so this is so beautiful, but yeah, I have to get rid of it. I love tear-offs. OK, so I have to change this, so when I perform search, when the text changes, I perform search, passing the query, then I'm going to do this awesome thing. Set state passing nothing. What? Ugh. OK, I'll wait. I'm using future or. So the advice here is do not change your code 5 minutes before the presentation. Async, because now I have a wait. And then set state. And again, because I changed this thing 5 minutes ago, it should work, please, God. Yes, it does. Right? This is awesome. I mean, this still looks mostly the same, but I just have this thing here, which, come on, really? No. Like, whenever you see set state passing nothing, that's a bad thing. That means that you're flagging the widget to be rebuilt when actually nothing changes. And please don't do that, really. So yeah, this is bad. So what can we do from here? So I think that the problem here is you have the input, the query, that changes over time. And based on that input, you have the results and the preamble that also change over time. And one way of, like, how do you represent things that change over time in Flutter or in Dart? With a stream? Yeah, awesome. You folks are awesome. You should come here. OK, so streams, right? So let's say, can I just change these things to streams and see how it looks like? Sorry. The carry is an input, and the counterpart of a stream is a sink. I think you didn't know about that, right? And it turns out that a string controller is a sink. OK. And the results would be a stream or search results. And the preamble would also be a stream of string. And yeah, let's do empty. Yep. OK. So yeah, of course it doesn't work. And oh, now it doesn't even build. Well, back to square 0. OK, so let's go step by step. I need to update the carry every time the input changes. So that means I have to do business logic.carry.add. Oh, now I can use the offs again. I'm happy. OK, so but now I have this pickle here. Text takes a string. Preamble is a string. Oh, preamble is a stream, and I cannot do async is not going to save me. Oh no. But what if I had something that I could have a stream and I could pass it a builder and it builds something? There is something called stream builder, which does literally that. Oh, this is small. OK. And a stream builder is something that takes a stream. Oh, and in this case, it could be the preamble. And it takes a builder, stream builder. And this builder takes a context, which it takes a context. And it takes a snapshot. But Paolo, what is a snapshot? Snapshot is the last known state of the stream, sort of. And I need to do another talk about that. And it has something called data, which is not null when there is data. So if we don't have any data, don't show anything, right? And here we have the same problem on the results. I have to wrap this with a stream builder. And this takes a stream, which is going to be the business logic dot results. And then this has to be a builder. Hey, IntelliJ people, this should be automatic. And then from the snapshot, I map the snapshot or empty if there is no data, right? Oh. Yeah, so about that. Oh, GGG. OK, that's something. Yeah, I fat fingered something here. But anyway, let's ignore the fact that it doesn't compile because it's not going to work anyway because it's not doing anything. But let's look at the final code. And I promise that I have a working example, I guess, now. So now I can use the tier off. It's awesome. It's very simple. I'm directly passing the data to the business logic. And I don't need to wrap the results on anything too complex. I mean, they are going to be async one day anyway. So, and stream builder is something provided by Flutter, and it is idiomatic. So this still looks pretty clean and close to what I wanted it to be, besides the stream builder stuff. So yeah, but you don't believe me, right? This does work. That's why I have another file. I have many files. So I have done and hot reload because it is awesome. And then, yeah, right? So let's go to done because you still don't believe me. It could be the other thing, just copy paste. Yeah, this is too small. Also, IntelliJ should scale, right? OK. So this is the done implementation, which is basically the same thing. You add, and you have stream builders, and you have the search business logic here. Oh, one last thing. You know the binary API? That has to go away. So the modus operandi for that is that you extract this cross-platform interface, and you inject the implementation. Like you have a binary implementation for Flutter and a JSON implementation for AngularDart. So, and then we have this. So we inject it like this. Not exactly like this, but like this. We create a search block. And what is a block? Suspense. And if you guys want to see, if you folks want to see how I implemented this thing, it's really simple. It's reactive programming. Anyway, I did too much already. So yeah, so that's how I wanted it to look like, and that was a process, more or less. It was a lot. There was a lot more tiers on this process, but that's what we got to. And let's go back to the slides. And then say, okay, Paolo, that's awesome and all, but you didn't say anything about Angular. And like it turns out like 90% of us care more about Angular than Flutter. Okay, fine. Let's say you have this search screen component, and the only thing it would have would be the block or the business logic, right? And then if you had a template that when you search, when you have a material input that when it changes, it sends the event to the component, and then just shows the preamble and the results, there is something called the async pipe that lets you do this. So instead of calling a method on the component, you directly add to the block. And instead of showing properties from the component, you access the strings from the block. And what the async pipe lets you do, it lets you use a stream as if it was a property. So your Angular code, I mean, yeah, you had to add some characters, but come on, that's good. So good. So we have this pattern now, that we have this class. Oh, I have this thing now. So we have this class. When we are refactoring, we extract the business logic to this class. And it has a well-defined set of inputs and a well-defined set of outputs. And if you happen to have any platform-dependent dependencies, you have to extract a common interface and then inject the different implementations. Nice, right? But there's a thing. If you don't give it a name, especially with an acronym, people are not going to use it. So we gave it a name. We called it a block, which is a business logic component, like the building blocks of an application. OK, yeah, I know, right? Yeah. But we had to name it. So good. So we went from this to this. But Paolo, you might ask me, because there's no QA, right? But Paolo, you may ask me. The whole point of your presentation was that over time, things are going to get more complicated. So how do you prevent this from happening again? Because it has happened before, and it will happen again. Well, some good old aggressively pedantic rules. And basically, we have a set of guidelines, and if you don't follow them, you are wrong, and there's no negotiation. That's the best set of rules. All right, so the guidelines for designing a block are, number one, the inputs and outputs are simple, streams and sinks. Like you cannot have platform-dependent concepts and constructs. That's kind of obvious. But the inputs and outputs are only streams. Can I have a function? No. Can I have a const? No. Sinks, streams. Second, dependencies must be injectable. And if you don't do that, you have more trouble than this. And they have to be platform agnostic. And by that, I mean what the interface you inject doesn't have to depend on Flutter or Angular or any concept, like, for example, having a browser window. Third, you cannot, like inside the block, you cannot branch on platform. You cannot have a if mobile do this, if AngularDart do that. Because again, when you start doing that, that's a rabbit hole that's going to make your code much harder to track. And lastly, if you follow the rules number 1, 2, and 3, you can do whatever you want. You can implement your block using imperative programming. You can program using functional programming. You can program it using smoke signals. I don't care. Just follow the 3 rules. But may I suggest you try reactive programming in these trying times? So we have guidelines for designing a block, but we also need guidelines for designing UI. And those are, there is a more or less one-to-one pairing between UI component and widget and a block. So in this case, we had a search screen. We would have a search screen block. And of course, you're not going to create a block to every single widget, especially in Flutter. Yeah, you don't want that. So you have to make a judgment call, and that's OK. Like, you have to define what complex enough is and what makes sense for you, and create a block for each widget that is complex enough. Second, components should send inputs as they are. Like if you have a block that takes an input that represents a text field, you are going to hook up that on-change directly. You're not doing anything else. Because the moment you start doing stuff, that's business logic. UI shouldn't do anything. And the counterpart for this rule is output should be displayed as close as to as is as possible. And you're going to say, but Paolo, you just said that like, there's no compromise. And I'm not a savage. I know that sometimes, for example, in Flutter, if you want to render text in like style test, you have to somehow massage the text. But it should be as close as possible. You should not add anything, transform anything. If you're going to display like an amount in dollars and you want to format that, you do not format that on Flutter. You format that on the block. And lastly, if you have any branch, and again, I'm not a savage, sometimes you need to do an if inside your widget, that's fine. But that if can only have one condition, and that condition is a block output, one block output. Because the moment you start doing ends, like block output A and B, the fact that you need to merge those two, that is also business logic. And yeah, so to wrap it up, and that's kind of obvious, but you have to move all your business logic to blocks following that pattern that I just just showed. Second, you have to keep your UI components simple, because the moment you start making them complex or making them think for themselves, then things get complicated. And lastly, design rules are not negotiable. And that's for the sanity of everyone. So with that, I say thanks, and I hope that's useful for you folks.